That is really a tough act to follow. I guess it's since 2011, right? Margot and I happened to sit together at the same table in San Diego, and we were talking about the Kala, the Shabbaton that we had done at that time, and it was really designed to break the current paradigm of our conventions and to allow us in 2013 to reinvent ourselves. And we were sitting and we were having lunch, I think it was, and on the spot I asked her to co-chair the convention, and 3 months later happened to convince her to say yes, and here we are. So thank you, Margot, for being the right Isha, the right woman, the right person at the right time for USCJ. What I want to do in my remarks is I want to share with you a little bit about what keeps me up at night and a little bit of what helps me get up in the morning. Just so you understand, I've probably been an insomniac most of my life. So that's not so surprising that I'm going to stay up at night and then still manage to get up in the morning. That's just the way in which I work. But what keeps me up at night right now actually is General Motors, is GM. If you've been paying attention to the news this last week, you know that GM just announced 15% layoffs, about 15,000 employees, and cuts over the foreseeable future of about $1 billion in order to understand what's happening today and reposition themselves for the future. There are 6 lines of automobiles that GM is no longer going to produce. And we shouldn't think that GM is the first to think about this. Ford announced 2 years ago that essentially it was not going to continue to produce the sedan, right? So now you have Ford and GM, 2 of the largest automobile manufacturers in the world, that are essentially saying that the 4-door sedan is done. It's not going to be the automobile of the future. What GM is going to invest in is essentially 3 things, 4 too, by the way. They're going to invest in electronic cars, and they're going to invest in driverless cars. And GM in particular, with the invention of OnStar, which I think was 1993 or 1998, I don't remember which one, but GM was really the first to start thinking about what is the customer experience within the car. And so that's now what their investment is going to be. Think about what that means. 100-plus-year-old company that is, by all measurements today, in pretty good financial shape according to its balance sheet, recognizes that there are currently and into the future profound changes that are happening such that it is making a decision today to reposition itself and to make a huge financial bet on the future. A bet, by the way, the same bet that Uber is making, that essentially there'll be less cars produced, less people who own cars, and the future is going to be about buying a ride and having an experience in that car based on electronic, social, and financial networks and economies. Right? That keeps me up at night. Because if any of us think that the kinds of profound changes and disruptions that are happening such that a company like GM would make such decisions are not also impacting and will impact the Jewish world, then you're not thinking. Tom Friedman, I think, still says this the best analysis of the disruption that's taking place in our time in his recent book, Thank You for Being Late. That climate change, the global marketplace, and the acceleration of technology are profoundly impacting the way in which humans organize, and more importantly, every aspect of our lives. Every aspect of our lives are going through a fundamental change. Imagine being a horse at the innovation of the automobile, and then imagine being a horse when Ford figured out how to mass produce them. That's the moment in time in which we are living today, and those impacts globally are certainly impacting our tradition. Our challenge is not to figure out how do we create cars or widgets or any other kind of manufactured product. Our challenge is how do we keep the faith to a 4,000-year-old tradition that has the power to transform our lives from the mundane and the ordinary to the holy and the sacred. It's a very different challenge. And the work that we at USCJ have been doing, and the work that all of you who are leaders of your Kehillot, what keeps you up at night is exactly the same question, right? We saw it on the slides that Andy and Margie so deftly shared with us in terms of what are the challenges that we all face. At the end of the day, those challenges all come back to the fact that the world today is vastly different, is fundamentally different, is disrupted from the world that many of us in this room recognize and remember, from those experiences that touched us, that moved us, that impact us, propelling us to be involved in Jewish communal leadership. That's what keeps me up at night. The question is not what are our values of conservative Judaism. We know that. Conservative Judaism is an authentic and dynamic Judaism. It is a Judaism that understands that to be relevant, you must live within the context in which human beings live, but that context is guided by the experience, by the navigation, to keep with the metaphor, of 4,000 years of the generations that came before us. When we say we don't know what conservative Judaism is and so forth and so on, quite frankly, I think we're making excuses. Because what we refuse to understand when we say that is how do we let go of some of the structures that we're maintaining because they're familiar with us in order to let come what will be the next iteration of the Jewish experience. To put it in historical terms, and then I'll pivot to what gets me up in the morning, to put it in historical terms, I still believe, as I did the day I walked into USCJ 10 years ago, I still believe that we're living through a moment in history that will be as impactful on the Jewish people as the shift from Israelite biblical tradition to rabbinic tradition, from the destruction of the temple to the rise of the rabbis. We are living in a post-Posek age. We still need rabbis, but the job of the rabbi is not necessarily to be a judge of Jewish law. The job of the rabbi is to be a madrich or madricha. How do we help navigate individuals through this moment of disruption and have them understand that Jewish wisdom and Jewish practice has a time-tested response to all the challenges of human existence, and that response is deepened when you share it in community. That's what keeps me up at night. Now, what gets me up in the morning? What gets me up in the morning is that there's a whole lot of people who care about this. And when I think about and I reflect upon where I was 10 years ago and where USCJ was when I found it, the fact that this is the conversation that we're having, and this is the conversation that we have been having, gives me lots of enthusiasm and optimism for the future. Because there's still hundreds, thousands of people who step forward to lead our communities. And it's the communities at the end of the day, it's the people in the local towns that are struggling with these questions, that want to be supported by a larger network, to know that they're not alone with them, and to share what's worked someplace else so they can try to replicate it and grow it and enhance it and build upon it in another community. That gives me a cause for optimism. There are so many people that I have met in so many corners of the world that are asking these questions. And in spite of how big the challenges are, and they are great, continue to step forward and say, Hineni, here I am. This matters. And I want to be a part of trying to figure it out and to nurture the next iteration of what will be the Jewish experience. To find the courage to let go of the things I need to let go of so I can find the courage to let come what the future is going to hold. That's what gets me up in the morning. And we at USCJ have been trying to do that in new ways. And this new roadmap is the right time for us. Strategic plans should only have a lifespan of 5 to 7 years before you sit down, reevaluate, and then create a new way forward. Especially today. 7 years might be too long already. It might be 5 years, right? Because we constantly have to be understanding this moment that we live in order to find the inspiration and the courage to address the challenges before us. I want to highlight just a couple ways, very specifically, not in terms of giving the infographics of what USCJ has accomplished in the last year, in the last 10 years. We have that for you, by the way. For those of you in the room, you have the infographics. For those of you that are joining us online, it will be on our website, if not today, tomorrow. So you can look for it there. I want to talk about 3 specific examples. One comes from KST, from our Kehillot Strengthening and Transformation, and 2 come from USY. And I could give more and more and more, but these are the 3 that come to my mind right now. The first is at Andy Scher's synagogue. His synagogue, Bethel in Pittsburgh, was one of the synagogues that participated in our cohort for inclusion action, sponsored through the Ruderman Family Foundation, one of our most important partnerships. And when I went to visit the synagogue last spring, what the leadership of that synagogue told me was that their involvement with the inclusion cohort of USCJ transformed the way in which they think about inclusion in their synagogue, to the point that they totally remodeled one of their sanctuaries so that there's no bima, so that everybody can access the Torah. And that they have people reading Torah today that wouldn't have read it previously because they couldn't get to the Torah reading stand. That they spent a year playing with seat configurations in another room, gathering input from their congregations so they could figure out how can they arrange the seating of the synagogue such that everybody feels included and not excluded, that there's line of sight, that there's the ability to hear, and the ability to participate and not simply be an audience member. And even more importantly, how they changed the culture of the community, where the congregation today presents itself and views itself. Its brand is to be the most inclusive Jewish community in Pittsburgh. That's an impact from the work that we've done together to solve a real problem that we face in the world. Now, 2 examples from USY. Thursday night, a group of us from the staff went to the Keshet Gala called Outstanding, capital O-U-T, standing. And one of the reasons that we went to this was not just because we have a significant partnership with Keshet, which is the only Jewish advocacy support educational group for the LGBTQ community, was not just to support our partnership, but because 2 out of the 3 awardees were either current or former USYer, and the 3rd awardee is a member from a conservative synagogue who goes to the Solomon Schechter Day School of Westchester. And so those 2 USYers are someone named Bennett Decker, who's now a student at the Jewish Theological Seminary in Columbia, and Sawyer Goldsmith, who is the Religious Education Vice President of USY. I want to tell you something about Bennett very briefly, and then I'll tell you more about Sawyer. Bennett, I've known Bennett for a number of years. He's from the Philadelphia area. where I was a rabbi. He was involved in USY. I know his family from Camp Ramah. I didn't know him very well, but when he was on USY pilgrimage, he and I were walking back from Friday night services up to the Fuchsburg Center, and I happened to ask him, I said, Bennett, you were in Poland just 2 days ago, now you're in Jerusalem. Here we are davening Friday night Kabbalat Shabbat services, overlooking the old city of Jerusalem. Tell me how you feel. And Bennett, if you get to know Bennett, you'll know that he's a very articulate young man. Bennett responded, Rabbi, let me tell you how I feel. 3 days ago, I was in Majdanek, in one of the death camps in Europe. And Majdanek, the memorial is a basin, a very large basin in which they've deposited the ashes that remained following the war, and they built a kippah, a dome over it. And there I was, and when you're around ash, you know, you can smell it. And when you're around it, you breathe it in, right? We all know about secondhand smoke and its impact and so forth and so on, and you breathe it in. And I remember learning in biology that when you breathe in ash, a part of it stays with you for a number of years before it actually clears your system. So I'm thinking, here I am in Majdanek, and I'm smelling and inhaling the remains of those who were persecuted and murdered in the Shoah and the Holocaust, and now 3 days later I'm in Yerushalayim, davening Kabbalat Shabbat, facing the old city. And what I felt like, Rabbi, he said to me, was that I became a vessel, a shaliach, for those who perished into the new city of the modern state of Jerusalem. Because I may have inhaled an element of their souls, of their remains in Majdanek, but I exhaled it while I was davening Kabbalat Shabbat here in Yerushalayim. I mean, I had to stop. First of all, what 16-year-old talks like this? Maybe your kids. But that's what USY does. That's what the conservative movement does. He went one step further, by the way, and he tied it to the text at the end of Sefer Bereshit, at the end of the book of Genesis. He tied it to the text in that Yaakov made Joseph and future generations promise to bring his bones, his remains, from Egypt to Israel. And so here's Bennett, a public school kid, making that textual connection because of USY. And Sawyer, I'll tell you about as well. Sawyer is transgender. He identifies by the pronouns today of he and she. Of he and him. And he spoke about how USY was his safe space. That as a young person, not sure of his identity, there were no transgender role models for him to consider. But USY embraced him, accepted him as he was, loved him, worked with him, supported him. But we had a logistical problem, which was, where do we house him during conventions? And we solved the logistical problem by going to our relationship with Keshet and asking for help. And that Sawyer ended up, as a result of his USY experience and his experience with Keshet, wanting to run for religious education vice president because he wanted to be a role model for other people who might be unsure or suffering from anxiety and depression as it relates to the transition that so many young people have today from adolescence to adulthood. And that it was USY that helped him not only find his authentic self, but also helped a really shy kid find his voice. This is what we do. All of us, day in and day out. And as overwhelming and stressful at times the challenge can be of living in this moment of disruption, where everything is changing by the second, we have to stay focused on our vision. Our vision is a Judaism that has wisdom, and through practice, its practice, can provide that wisdom and guide us to find our authentic selves and to find our voices, to live lives of meaning and purpose and, God willing, achieve shleimut, a sense of wholeness and completeness. If we ever lose sight of that, if we ever lose the courage to continue to invent and reinvent in order to accomplish that, then the obstacles on the road ahead are going to only appear like potholes. Instead, we have a destination to get to. And the destination, quite frankly, isn't important. It's the journey. And we can only do that together. So I leave USCJ with a lot of thanks. I'm going to privately say thanks to the board and to all of our staff, but there's a few people that I have to mention by name. Richie Skolnick, first president, well actually Ray Goldstein, I don't know if you're still with us, you were the first president I worked with, and then you were on the team, and then Richie Skolnick, that we worked together with for all this transition. You took more bullets and arrows and covered my blind side in more ways than I probably understand my blind side was open. Margot, your comments today, I was quelling. We're channeling each other. You are a great human being, and we're the right president at the right time for USCJ. And our personal relationship will go well beyond our professional relationship. And Ned, I'm going to miss our breakfasts, but we're going to have to figure out how to do them anyway. Yeah. Maybe not with the same frequency, but you definitely, we're talking about roadmap. You like to drive, and sometimes you like to drive fast, and that might be the type of leadership we need now. Someone who understands how to get us from here to there and in a hurry. Because though our vision is timeless, the sense of urgency is immediate. But I have every confidence in you and the last group of people that I want to thank, which is the great team that I work with. Leslie, Jonathan, Balchin, Stephen, my colleagues in the senior leadership of USCJ and all the staff of USCJ. The best thrill for me has been able to come to work and to be engaged with you in this sacred work every single day. And finally, I want to thank all the leaders of the Kehillot, my rabbinic and cantorial colleagues, my educational colleagues, my executive director colleagues, the presidents, every person who sits on a board of directors and steps forward to say Hineni. It's because of that collective Hineni that I know that the future will be bright.